Today I'm going to be talking to world champion freediver William Trubridge. And you might be asking yourself, what does a yogi and a freediver have in common? Well, quite a lot actually. The breath plays a huge part in both of our practices, and there is the cultivation of surrender to move beyond the limits of the mind. In this conversation, I hope to find out about the physiology of the breath, the power of the nervous system, the altered states that arise in the deep, and hopefully get to look also at the parallels between yoga and freediving. So come on, let's take a dive together. I mean, the biggest difference between you and me is that I can inhale if I want to, but for you, it's a little bit more of a life and death situation.
It is, but for a lot of that, you don't actually have the desire.
Mm.
In fact, for dives that really work, breathing is something that you're not even thinking about. It's you're thinking about the execution of the dive and hydrodynamics, being relaxed, that kind of thing, and the urgency to breathe again has you've kind of become immune to that to a certain extent.
What is the thing that switches from the breath being important, mentally thinking you need to breathe to stay alive, to not even thinking about the breath?
There's two halves to that. There's the physiological and the mental side. Physiologically, you're training your body to adapt to high levels of CO2 because it's the CO2, the waste gas, that gives you that urge to breathe. It's not actually a lack of oxygen. When you feel that urge to breathe, it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty much all because of a buildup of CO2. So you can train yourself physiologically to dampen that response to hypercapnia, to high CO2. And mentally, you can train yourself to remain relaxed, to kind of keep your composure, your equanimity in that state. Because the moment that you start to kind of respond to it with agitation or panic, obviously you're going to burn through your oxygen stores a lot quicker, and it shortens that available time. But if you can relax when you feel the urge to breathe and just see it as purely CO2 or waste gas, then it opens the door to a lot longer performance. You can extend that phase of the breath hold a lot.
And you also work with students. You teach freediving.
Yeah, I've taught freediving my whole career, but recently I've started to teach it outside the boundaries of freediving
Mm-hmm.
to entrepreneurs and CEOs and people who wouldn't normally be exposed to these techniques, because we've seen such a huge crossover of these techniques in uh, building kind of tolerance to stress and anxiety as one, but also in developing a capacity to go beyond your perceived limits. When you think that you're kind of at the end of your breath hold, or you think you're at the limits of your potential, maybe you're only 40% of the way there. And
Mm-mm.
prove that to someone through the vehicle of a breath hold. And then it opens the door to, okay, what else? What other potentials do I have that are unrealized, that are untapped? And so it's kind of an empowering experience to go through.
That's very interesting indeed. And so, would you be teaching them pranayama techniques by any chance? Or do you do pranayama
Pranayama is
technique?
a tool that I use in teaching, but typically the first kind of a taste of it is through just a pure breath hold in a pool. So we'll
Mm-hmm.
do uh, 3 or 4 repetitions of a breath hold, and the third or fourth one is where they're pushing it as long as they possibly can. And in between, they're just focusing on relaxation, breathing techniques, but not normally going into a pranayama, like an extended inhale and exhale approach for those breath holds. That's kind of a separate exercise that I use to develop CO2 tolerance and to develop the control over their breath and other aspects.
Do you work both with inhale retention and exhale retention, or do you start with one and then move on to the other?
Yeah, interesting question. I've always done in my career in the past, I've always done only inhale retention. Inhale, hold, exhale with a ratio of 1 to 4 to 2. Um, so the exhale is double the inhale and the hold is double the exhale. But recently in preparation, I don't think I would call it pranayama, but I've started to put more importance in kind of relaxation breathing on the hold after the exhale. And physiologically, we know that volume, that lung volume, after a passive exhale, is when you have the best balance of perfusion and ventilation, meaning you have like the best balance of blood volume in the lungs as well as air volume. If you inhale, the blood goes out. When you force the exhale, you don't have enough air. But in between, you have this perfect kind of balance. And so you get the best conditions for oxygenation of the blood. So it makes sense in terms of relaxation to insert the is it kumbhaka? I'm not too familiar with it.
Yeah, so kumbhaka is a retention.
To have that after the exhale, even if it's just for a few seconds. And so I've started teaching this idea of this concept of the 3 second gap. So you inhale, soft, diaphragmatic, passive, inhale, and then just round that off into an exhale. And then there's a gap. It doesn't have to be 3 seconds. It could be 2, it could be 8, but just a gap until you actually feel you want to breathe again. And you rest, you pause in that kumbhaka after the exhale.
Well, actually, a friend of mine was talking about the diving scene and was saying, she's not a diver, but she was just saying that they used to hyperventilate, and apparently that is very dangerous to hyperventilate before you hold the breath. And then I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, actually, I do this before I hold my breath in pranayama. So it's like a forceful push out of the breath, alternately changing the nostril. And so when I do that first and then I hold either in or out, I'm always able to hold it for longer.
What you're doing there is you are overventilating and getting rid of carbon dioxide first from your lungs, and then it comes out of the blood into the lungs. Then it also comes out of your body water into the blood. Because we have a large amount of CO2 that's dissolved in the water, with 70% water, and it's dissolved as carbonic acid in that water. And that keeps the balance of the acidity of the body stable. And if you hyperventilate, then you extract the CO2 and become hypocapnic, your low CO2. And it will mean that you have basically like a better buffering capacity for that CO2. So you can essentially, it's easier to hold your breath for longer. It feels easier because you're starting off with a deficit of CO2. But there's several reasons why in the long term that will lead to a reduced breath hold. The two most important ones are what's called the Bohr effect, which is where if your blood is not acidic enough, then you cannot get the oxygen out of your hemoglobin. So that the hemoglobin, the red blood cells, hold on to the oxygen when it's not acidic. And so if you've taken all the CO2 out, your blood is now alkaline, and so you don't actually get to access the oxygen in your blood as easily. So that's the Bohr effect. And then there's the mammalian dive reflex, which is very important to freediving, obviously, whereby your body conserves oxygen more, it becomes more oxygen efficient and economical when there's a higher content of CO2. So CO2 is like a trigger to go into O2 conservation mode. And if you've off-gassed all that CO2 to begin with, then you're just going to be burning through your oxygen reserves so much more quickly. You don't feel the urge to breathe because the CO2 takes a long time to build up because it was started low. But it's all that time you're using your oxygen more wastefully, and so your actual potential is limited. So that's why a breath hold without hyperventilation, like a streak or breath of fire or the Hoff method or other similar things, means that you kind of taking a step back. It'll be more difficult, but in the long run, you'll have cleaner, longer breath holds.
Oh, well, that's very interesting, and thank you, because I'll start practicing that tomorrow.
It'll feel frustrating at first.
Yeah.
Like, well, I could hold my breath for 3 minutes, and now it like feels horrible after a minute and a half. That's the work, is to get accustomed to that CO2, because I tell all my students, CO2 is your friend. It's the gas that regulates your oxygen. It's the gas that allows you to access your oxygen in the hemoglobin and many other different things as well.
There are some people that are interested in the relationship between breathing and the nervous system. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that. And also, someone asked me to ask you, what are the techniques that you use to keep the nervous system calm before a dive?
Yeah, great question. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these techniques already, but kind of my take on them is that the diaphragm muscle is basically a way to reverse engineer your central nervous system state. We have stretch receptors on the breathing muscles that tell the brain when that muscle has been fired. So it basically sends a signal to the brain. And the stretch receptors on your diaphragm muscle, which is the kind of like the bowl, upside down salad bowl that sits in your chest, and when it flattens, it pulls the air into your lungs. So the stretch receptors on that tell the brain to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your calming, rest and digest nervous system. Lowers the heart rate. It sends more blood to the prefrontal cortex, etc. Whereas the stretch receptors on your intercostal muscles that expand the rib cage, so give you like a more of a high torso breath, those stretch receptors do the opposite. They signal to activate the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, adrenaline, and more blood flow to your amygdala, so you become more emotive. And just by choosing which set of breathing muscles to use, you can determine which of those two nervous systems is activated, whether you're going to be calm and composed and rational, or whether you're going to be kind of full of adrenaline and other stress hormones and emotive. This is one of the halves of what I call the mental immune system, which is a technique I've created basically just to deal with stress and anxiety. And there's a physical half, which is the type of breath. Diaphragmatic is one part of that. It also should be nasal, and also with this slight pause after the exhale and before the next inhale. The other half is a mental technique that I call observer mind. So those two halves together kind of help to defend against stress, anxiety, and pressure, which attacks us on both fronts. It impacts mentally, but it also gets inside our body and makes us kind of like tense and agitated, and we start to gasp and breathe in the air up high. So yeah, the abdominal belly breathing, the diaphragmatic breathing, is a way to kind of snap out of that by reverse engineering a parasympathetic state.
So when you say belly breathing, you mean inflate the belly, but keep the chest passive.
Exactly, yeah. I don't know if my camera's going to allow me to demonstrate this, but yeah, it's wanting to zoom in. But basically, breathing so that the hand on your chest doesn't move at all, but the hand that's belly should move out and in with each inhale. So that's a regular diaphragmatic breath, and it's how we breathe when we're asleep. It's how babies breathe. It's how wild animals breathe. So it's the most efficient breathing muscle, but it's also the one that brings us back into that restful, calm, composed state.
The other half you said was the mind. So observing the mind.
It's a state that I call observer mind, which is essentially at its core is mindfulness, but it's adopting this idea that everything that you experience is contents to your awareness.
Is what? Sorry,
Is purely contents to your awareness.
Yes.
So it comes in the same bucket. And it's easy to do with like what we see and what we hear, right? Like my voice right now, obviously that's just contents that's coming via the auditory system, whatever. The same with the sights. But when you start going inwards, you can actually discover that thoughts and emotions themselves are in that same category. You're not the person who's thinking the thought, you're just the receiver who's hearing the thought. You're not experiencing a sensation, even a sensation as intense as the urge to breathe. It is still just contents, data that's coming to our awareness. And the only you that matters is the awareness itself, just that speck of consciousness. So that's what I call observer mind. And it's a way to shift the perspective to remember that so that you can kind of detach yourself from high pressure situations or stress or anxiety.
I mean, that's a beautiful practice. Have you ever done a Vipassana retreat? Because this is exactly what we do on a Vipassana retreat.
No, I haven't. It's been it's been on my list for years,
Ah,
but I've never made the time to do one properly.
I mean, you have usually 10 days of sitting meditation. And I think you kind of need that amount of time to really, you have an hour of sitting, an hour of walking meditation, an hour of sitting, an hour of walking, and it goes on like this all day for 10 days. And I found that the emotions are they're the fastest by day 6. And it took me that long to even just have a little bit of uh, a grasp on observing the emotion as separate from me, to the point that it was actually an impulse. Literally, they were all just impulses occurring. And also, there's something that you said on that. You had a beautiful TED talk, which I really enjoyed, and I will put the link to that below for everyone. And you took everyone on your dive, and there was a point when you were saying, and then you start to hear that the heartbeat slows down, and I have to say that I think my heartbeat was actually going a bit faster at that point because I was with you all the way. But there were some interesting things that you said, and I'd like to actually pull some up. So, neutral buoyancy, only yourself in the present moment. After here, you have to leave a part of you behind, which is like, it's like the entrance fee to the next level, it seems. And relinquish the concept of breathing itself. Continue on with only that which is necessary for your journey. The less of yourself you take down, the lighter the load. I mean, it's exactly the same as the spiritual path. What you've had to do down there is exactly the same. I don't see any difference.
Yeah, most of the time we have all this baggage that we carry around with us, the ego, the emotions, the attachments, the worries, the endless rehashing of the past. And it's just this kind of this enormous pack that's weighing us down on our back. And in a free dive, in order to succeed, you have to give that up. You have
Mm.
to give up even the concept of being an individual, like an I am, in order to just kind of really relax and give yourself up to what you're doing. So it's kind of almost by happenstance that I was required to find those kind of techniques in freediving. But yeah, I do see a huge similarity with that spiritual path, which I have also tried to kind of reach the same places or conclusions there as well. But obviously, you do need to dedicate a lot more time to it, which I haven't been as diligent.
Well, it's kind of it in every moment. You just keep trying. You make the choice to just keep trying. Doesn't matter if you can't do it. One
Mhm.
moment, you always have another moment.
Mhm. Yes, it's true. I just sometimes I feel like the ocean or freediving is kind of almost a shortcut through a lot of that. Like if I'm meditating on a mat, it will take me, if I'm lucky, 30 minutes to get to a state where I feel like the gaps between my thoughts are longer than the thoughts themselves. Whereas underwater, you get there in seconds on a deep dive. It's kind of almost like a hack or a shortcut to that state.
And do you think that that is because of the? I mean, it would be really nice to go through the buoyancy stages. And do you think maybe you could just explain them a little bit for everyone? And then, I mean, my question actually is, do you think that it's got anything to do with the buoyancy stage that you're in that gets rid of the thoughts?
Yeah, to answer that question first, I don't think so. I think it's related to other physical and mental components like I'll talk about. But for the buoyancy, what's happening is your body is losing buoyancy because the lungs are becoming compressed. So the weight of the water column above you is compressing that air volume inside your lungs to a smaller and smaller size. And at a depth of around about 15, 20 meters, its volume means that your body is now the same weight as the equivalent volume of water. So basically, you're neutrally buoyant, like a fish. If
Ah, okay.
fish doesn't do anything, it doesn't float to the surface, and it doesn't sink. Past that depth, your lungs continue to compress, so now your average density is more than water. So that's when we start what we call the free fall. You can stop
Mm-hmm.
swimming and you keep on sinking, which is a beautiful experience if you give yourself up to it. But it also means that you pay for it on the way back up, because when you turn around, you're now, if you don't do anything, you'll sink. And so you have to overcome that negative buoyancy to get yourself back to the surface. But
that, I guess, takes more energy.
yeah, the ascent is much more energy intensive. Probably 70% of the work is or more is done in the
Ah.
in a deep dive. I see it as like the descent is like a surrender and just letting yourself go, and the ascent is more of kind of like a fight to return to the element that you need to sustain you. It's kind of like a
Mm.
descent. You're daring yourself to stretch out the umbilical cord that you have to the surface until it's just like a tiny little thread, and then you have to prove yourself by returning back up to the surface. So the reason why I feel like the water, and in particular being deep under the water, is a fast track to that state, is because firstly there's an absence of stimuli or sensations coming in.
Mm.
There's no sound. There's very little to see, and in fact, at depth, everything is muted and dark. I don't wear goggles, so I can't even see very well if I do open my eyes, but most of the time my eyes are closed. So there's nothing coming from the kind of
Sense
sound,
organs.
yeah, the senses at all. And as well as that, your body feels weightless, or at least the sensation, there's no kind of points of contact. So the sensation on the body is uniform in every direction, which means it
Mm.
kind of disappears. It's like being on a float tank. There's no sensation of any kind of points that are different to another, and so your body like dissolves in that uniformity. So in the absence of any kind of stimuli or the sensation of having a body, in the absence of that metronome for the passing of time, which is the breath, then your your brain doesn't really have anything to do.
Mm.
And so those gaps between the thoughts start to dilate. There's something about the water as well, and I think it's probably what attracts us to the water for holidays, even if it's just kind of sitting next to a lake or the sea, that it just takes away our kind of thoughts about the past the, or the future, anchors you in the present in a kind of a natural way. And the deeper that you go, the more that effect is magnified. And so if you don't have any senses, you don't have a sensation of a body, the sensation of time passing is taken away because you're holding your breath and that metronome is gone, and you don't have any thoughts of the past or the future, what else is left? Like, there's very little substrate for the mind to act on. And so it's very easy for it to get into that empty mind, samadhi state.
Well, that's quite interesting, because if you're above sea level and you're meditating and you don't have any thoughts, it's actually easier for thoughts to come in.
Mm.
And so then, in fact, some people are saying that when there are no thoughts to observe, it's actually harder than when there are thoughts to observe, because you've got something to do. And then the idea is to observe and not interfere, allow everything to be as is without being a part of it.
Have you heard of something called the blue pearl? I think it's called in yoga.
No, I have not.
I only heard
What's
of it
that?
described with this name just this year, but it's
Mm-hmm.
something that I've experienced for close to 20 years in freediving. And then I just found out that it's actually a phenomenon that's described in some yogic texts. And it's a tiny, or at least my experience is a very tiny pinpoint of blue light that doesn't have any volume. It's just like a coordinate, like a speck. And it appears in the very center of the visual field. But for me, it only appears when the mind is completely empty and completely like fixed and unwavering in that emptiness. And the moment that I have a thought, that blue pinpoint just kind of wavers, or it goes blurry, or it disappears. And so typically what will happen is if I'm on a dive, especially on a dive where I'm not going for maximum depth, but I'm just going down to, say, 60 meters and staying there, just like completely motionless, holding onto the rope at that depth. And when the mind empties, after a while, this pinpoint will appear in the visual field. And then the first thing that happens is my mind says, there it is, there's the
Yeah.
blue. And the moment that I have that thought, obviously it disappears.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
empties again and it comes back, and I'm able to just hold it there with complete emptiness of the mind.
No
So it's
interference.
mm, yeah, just the slightest thought. I don't know if it changes something to do with the visual cortex or the maybe the iris kind of like just vibrates slightly. Who knows what it is? But it requires like ultimate complete stillness for that blue pinpoint to appear and to stay there. And yeah, when I heard that it was described as a blue pearl in yoga, and I looked it up, it was the description was pretty much identical to what I've been experiencing in these times.
If you have the link,
I can say.
while I have you here, it would be nice for those who are interested in freediving to hear a little bit about your training schedule. Like if you're like a natural week, I mean, I'm interested as well. If you're not competing and you're going through a week, how would you do it?
Depends which phase of the season I'm in,
Mm-hmm.
because early in the season I'm concentrated more on pull training, base training, resistance, breath hold. Later in the season it becomes more about depth adaptation. But the one thing about freediving is it's a sport that has many different components, perhaps more than almost any sport, because it's combining the physical and the mental, also with the breath and flexibility of the lungs and the body. So when I map it out, there's about 9 or 10 components that all have to be trained contemporaneously. They
Mm.
all need to be at maximum level in order for you to perform at maximum level. If any of them are weaker, then that's the one that's going to hold you back. So it becomes kind of a little bit of an exercise of spinning plates, like keeping all these plates spinning. And if one starts to wobble, you have to go over there and address that.
Mm.
So yeah, training is about maximizing how many of those plates you can target, uh, and doing very specific high intensity exercises, such as swimming laps underwater on a breath hold with short recoveries, so that you're targeting high CO2, high lactic acid, technique, streamlining, the mental side, breathing, like at least half a dozen of those plates. There's the pull training, flexibility work, which is important not just for the body, but also for the rib cage, the rigid airways, and the diaphragm, so that you can accommodate the pressure changes at depth. We have to train the equalization techniques that allow us to kind of portion out the air to the middle ear so that your eardrum doesn't burst.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, is the whole side of technique, like swimming more efficiently and having more explosive power in the way that you swim, so that you can then dial that back to a level that's relaxed but economical. Uh, and I can go on. There's so many different components like this, and it's just a balancing act of getting them all like firing on all cylinders. Probably map out to maybe 30 hours, 30 to 40 hours of training a week at the
Mm-hmm.
most. But the rest days are just as important as the training days. And the rest days is when your body is getting a chance to catch up. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
training, we're sending a signal to the body saying, hey guys, we need you to build more red blood cells, or to adapt to low oxygen, or to train the spleen to contract to release red blood cells during the dive, all these kind of little components. And then on the actual recovery days, that's when your body is making those changes. And if
Mm-hmm.
you skip recovery, you're just sending this message, but not giving it time to actually do the homework.
Oh, that's very important information. And let's say after a competition, how do you re-enter your training? Like, how much time do you take to recover first?
If it's the competition that I've been kind of training for and peaking at, then I'll take at least a couple of weeks off after that, to kind of have complete downtime. I'm still doing some kind of exercise or
Mm.
swimming, something, but not focusing on training too much. And then I'll start to build up into the next season of base training, so predominantly pool and strength and breath hold work, and then starting to introduce the depth components later in the season.
Thank you. I was quite interested to, when you're on a dive and your aim is to get this white tag at the bottom, are there any danger signs that you might need to abort and you don't go for the white tag?
Yeah, I like the question because it's something that's kind of developed during my career, which wasn't there in the start, which is this very, very strong and pretty much it's like always works. It's always perfect. It's near perfect kind of function, intuition about whether I'm going to make the dive or not. It's only at the ascent though. So once on the way down, I kind of have a few cues, but if I'm feeling really terrible, then yes, I'll abort and not go for the tag. But typically, I won't know until I'm on the way up. Once I've actually
Oh,
tag, and by then you might think it's too late because you've got to swim back up to the surface. But the
yeah.
beauty of the discipline that I concentrate on, which is no fins, so I'm just propelling myself with my hands and my feet. The idea is that we're swimming next to a rope, and if I need to, if I want to abort, I can start to pull on the rope, which makes the ascent easier. That would disqualify me for that dive,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd get back to the surface without blacking out. And recently in my career on the ascent, I start to get this intuition, and I call it ingmi, INGMI. I'm not going to make it, and
Oh,
it's it's not an urge to breathe. It's just this kind of acute awareness of how far I have left to go to the surface, and I guess how much oxygen is still remaining in my body, and basically doing the math on that.
mm,
So if you ask me in the dive, like how far are you from the surface, I wouldn't know. And I definitely don't know how much oxygen is in my body. But subconsciously, my body has that data. It's able to interpret from my buoyancy and how fast I'm moving in between strokes. It can use that to interpret how far I am from the surface. And it
mm,
has ways of interpreting oxygen, and it basically does the math on that somehow and tells me, okay, this is going to be close, or no, you're not going to make it. You should start pulling now. And so
mm.
far, that like in recent years, that intuition has been foolproof, like absolutely foolproof. Early in my career, I had no idea, and so sometimes I would just keep on swimming, and I wouldn't make it. And sometimes I'd think I wasn't going to make it, and I would. It was kind of all a little bit more of an unknown. But now, on the ascent at least, it becomes very clear whether the dive is going to be a success.
So when this ingmi is true, what happens?
So I always listen to it now. Like if it's when I start to feel it coming on, it'll be subtle at first, and
Mm,
I'll watch it. And if it keeps on growing, then I will abort. And and I also kind of intuitively know how long I can ride that kind of fine line
mm-hmm,
between not leaving it too late to abort. But if it stays kind of just subtle and just kind of borderline, then I know that I'll be able to get to the surface, and I may be hypoxic. I'll have low oxygen, but I won't black out. Now, I just learned that it's kind of completely impervious. It is always foolproof, and so I just have to listen to it. Sometimes that takes a little bit of kind of like holding yourself back or diligence in order to like not try and go for the carrot, not try and get to the surface. But I've learned that lesson so many
mm.
times that I can't ignore this.
I have a couple more questions, and one of them is these techniques that you use, these mental techniques that you use to keep out all that's unnecessary. We've already spoken about how those are tools that one uses on the spiritual path. How easily are you able to translate using them underwater and in your daily life?
Surprisingly, they translate kind of seamlessly, those
Mm,
techniques. And the beauty of it is that you can program the techniques into your subconscious mind. so that it's not something that you have to actively do. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
that's been the game changer with the mental immune system, because it's like a physical immune system. If it's something that you have to think about, like if every time you got a cut or a virus or pathogen, you had to tell your body, okay, send the white blood cells to my second finger where the cut is, like it's not going to work. And this for a mental pathogen, it has to be something that's working in the background, because in the heat of the moment, when we find ourselves kind of in a stressful situation or thrown into an argument with a family member or a work colleague, then you're not going to remember to employ this or that technique. It has to be automatic. It has to be a
Mm.
reflex to the stimuli of stress or anxiety. And that is achievable. We can recode our response to stress and anxiety so that we spontaneously activate the parasympathetic nervous system,
Yeah.
allowing us to think more clearly, to be more stable, to be more calm. And the proof of this has been proven to myself, at least so many times, when I find myself in a situation. Well, the first thing that I notice is that my breathing has changed.
Mm.
It's kind of more grounded, and the way that I'm thinking is slightly more detached. It's like I'm on the other side of soundproof glass. And I notice that before I actually notice that the situation itself is kind of a shitty, stressful situation. So for
Mm.
me, that's proof that it's become subconscious. It's a reflex.
Automatic. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, that's great, not only for you, but also the people around you. I mean, because then you're also diffusing it and spreading calm to everyone in your sphere.
Mm. Yeah, I hope so. And that's definitely something that can happen for sure.
And then hopefully that spreads and carries on and goes further out and further out. And my final question, and I don't want this is not a morbid question, but from your experience of being in that place of stillness, what is your view of death? Do you have a view of death?
Mm. Yeah, and it's a realization I had 4 or 5 years ago when I did actually have a near-death experience in freediving because of an incident that happened in a dive. And it made me realize that death isn't something that happens to us; it's something that happens to everyone who's around you. Like the moment that
Mm.
you're dead, you're not there anymore. It's difficult to describe how kind of final that is. But the people around you obviously go on, and that's where the loss is. That's where the emptiness is. For you, it's just a kind of a stop mark. So that's basically how I would evaluate death. But then in the sport, it's obviously a sport that's taking you into a realm that cannot sustain human life. And so we're kind of like going as far as we dare into Hades, into the underground, and hoping that you've got enough oxygen to make the journey back. So we're kind of in a similar way to mountaineers who climb Mount Everest and these high peaks. We're stretching ourselves into that death zone, as it's called in alpinism, and I think that this is part of the attraction to the sport because it allows you to taste your own existence, uh, perhaps more acutely when you come back, when you return from Hades, when you return from that kind of liminal zone, that's close to death. While it's a morbid topic, there's still some way that it can inform us about our existence, and I think that activities like freediving or where you're kind of going into that zone are a way that we can kind of live more acutely, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I think too. I think it makes us more alive
Mm.
in some way. Hmm.
Yeah.
Bill, thank you so much for taking this time to talk to me and everyone that's listening.
Thank you, Natasha. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I certainly learned a lot from Will during that conversation. And the first thing I'm going to do is stop my Bastrika before my inhale and exhale retentions tomorrow morning. How about you? What did you take away from it? Did anything resonate with you? Leave it in the comments if it did. And don't forget, liking and subscribing is free.